Okay, it is 2:01 p.m. or that's in Vietnam and 3:01 p.m. in Malaysia time. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to People for Peat's final symposium series of 2022. So it's a bit of a bittersweet day today, but I'm glad to be ending on a high note here because we're closing this year's series with the fifth and final symposium with the theme Culture and Sustenance. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very happy to be here. And just to introduce myself, my name is Mariam Ghani, and I am the Stakeholder Engagement and Communications Manager at Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's me. So if you haven't met me already, I've been running along with my communications team, who you will see in the Zoom chat box and who have been running around behind the scenes getting this event prepared. So we've been doing this for the second year running, and this is our final year conducting the symposium. So thank you so much for joining us today for our final one. We really appreciate your support and your support throughout this whole time. So before we start, some basic guidelines for our symposium. So of course, in Zoom, you all are very familiar with how Zoom works, but if you could please rename yourself to the following format. So your name followed by your organization, that'll be really helpful. And in today's symposium, please make sure to keep your microphone on mute the whole time, as well as your video off. And of course, we like to keep things interactive at People for Peat. So please feel free to utilize the chat box for any questions that you have from our speakers throughout the presentation. So we can address the questions during the Q&A session. So before we start, just a quick poll to find out where everyone is joining us from and how you heard about our symposium. So I'll just give you a couple seconds to fill out the poll, whether you heard about it from social media or other people's social media, from our newsletter, word of mouth, or if there's any other ways that you've been hearing about our symposium. Again, just to thank you for joining us today. Again, we really, really appreciate it. Okay, so we've got about 75% of people voting. So I'll just end the poll now and share the results with you. So sounds like most of you came through other ways. Perhaps that is via email, or if someone shared the link with you, that's awesome. And some of you came through social media, and then others through word of mouth. So again, thanks so much for joining us wherever you came from. We really appreciate it. All right, so today we have prepared for you as our final symposium. So as usual, we'll do the introduction, and I'll talk to you a little bit about what People for Peat has been doing so far. And then we will go right into our talks with none other than our speakers, Ms. Chang and Mr. Khan, who are going to be sharing us some really exciting stuff around the theme of culture and sustenance. And then that will be followed by our Q&A session, and then we'll do a quick closing. All right. So to start us off, I like to play a quick little video just to introduce you guys to People for Peat if you haven't heard from us already.
Prevention activities with real action in the ground, together with the local peoples and supported by government and the corporation, and it will be one of the best solutions.
My hope for the Asian peatlands is that there will be more awareness amongst the general public, amongst the government, amongst the private parties about the very important role peatlands play in regulating the climate, in maintaining biodiversity, and in providing an income for local and regional communities.
To maintain peatland ecosystem, it is essential to build capacity of local communities, especially in restoration and wise use of peat forest.
In the future, we hope to see more businesses on peatlands to operate sustainably.
Let's help protect our peat forest together, because we need to set a better future for our children.
All right, so that's a quick video, a little bit about our program and the type of experts that have been supporting our program throughout. And so just a little bit more about our program. So EU SUPA, which stands for the Sustainable Use of Peatlands and Haze Mitigation, consists of two components. People for Peat is known as actually component 2, and we consist of a coalition that works with non-state actors. And what we're trying to do here is to mainstream data, to increase awareness, as well as to build more sustainable businesses. And our funding is by the European Union, and our time frame for our project has been 3 years, so our time is almost up. But overall, our goal here, along with GIZ, which is component 1, is to reduce fires and haze in the ASEAN region. And so that's what we've been working to do so far. And so People for Peat is made up of 3 coalition members, starting with the World Resource Institute Indonesia, where they're kind of the research-based component of our coalition, followed by Yayasan Inisiatif Dagang Hijau, also known as IDH, and they bring together companies, CSOs, and financiers to build, again, more sustainable business solutions. And then where we come in from Tropical Rainforest Conservation and Research Center, our mission has been to conserve tropical rainforest plant species and lead landscape-wide protection and reforestation projects throughout Malaysia, as well as now throughout the ASEAN region. So the challenges that we're trying to address with our project has been to address the lack of reliable data and information. So throughout the last 3 years, what we've been trying to do is compile all the knowledge about peatlands that's possible and kind of put it together and make it more accessible to the public. And then secondarily, we're also doing the sustainable business solutions. So because it's been quite obvious that, you know, there are not a lot of sustainable business options for people operating on peatlands, as well as limited access to funding in peatland areas. So we're trying to address those issues. And then lastly, there's also a lack of awareness and capacity on peatlands. So what we've been trying to do is to focus on that. So building awareness, building capacity through our programs like today and our symposiums, as well as our other programs such as our Peat Ranger program. So far, we've been doing a lot of different things over the past 3 years, even throughout the pandemic. Of course, many things moved to virtual, but as things started to open up, we've been able to go out into the field, meet with a lot of our stakeholders, run actual programs, do site visits and things like that. And so we've done that in all 3 pillars of our program. So really thanks to your support. So these are some of the highlights that we've been able to achieve in the past 3 years. So again, a lot of online engagements, but also a lot of workshops, hands-on workshops and site visits and engagements with the community. So before we start, I also want to just get a sense of where everyone is coming from today. So what I'm going to do is launch a quick poll, and you can let me know where you're joining us from today. All right, so I'll give you all some time. Okay, I think most of you have answered. And sounds like most of you are joining us from Malaysia. We've got some people from the Philippines, welcome, and some people from Vietnam. So that's actually where I'm from today. I'm based in KL, but today I'm joining you guys from Vietnam as well. So hi, everyone. So thanks for joining us. Okay, so next up, I know you guys have been waiting for this, and I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker of the day, who is none other than Miss Chang Lei of LVDI International, and she's a nature conservation expert, and she is based in Vietnam as well, where she has been working for the past 15 years to raise awareness among local communities in buffer zones in central and highland regions of Vietnam about the importance of biodiversity and sustainable development. So one of her success stories in her career is being able to save the habitat of the red-shanked Duke langur population in the Sontra Peninsula. And today she'll be sharing with us her experience on sustaining cultural practices in wildlife protection. So this is a good kind of case study on how you balance, conservation and culture, as well as sustenance. So this is going to be a perfect talk to kick us off for today's theme. So over to you, Ms. Chang.
Thank you, Mariam. I feel so glad that I could be invited to meet you all and share with you my story, because I keep sharing this story during the last 10 years to inspire, and also hope that there will be other stories to save the species in other areas of our Asia. So I will share my screen. So actually with the topic about the peatland, I have not had experience, but I'm sure that my story could be benefit for you in case that you want to contribute your effort in saving a habitat or an areas that you want to join in. So my presentation will share a case study from Sơn Trà Peninsula in Da Nang City of Vietnam. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I have 4 years working for Education for Nature Vietnam. That is also an organization to protect the wildlife in Vietnam. So during that 4 years, I have traveled along the central of Vietnam to study how the wildlife from the forest had been hunted and traded along Vietnam, and also to Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand. After that, I figured out stop the hunting is not kind of possible. So I focused on education and raising awareness of community. I choose a community in Da Nang City of Vietnam to try my best with my team that could save one areas and see how effect it could inspire the other areas. So I spent 8 years. That's a really long time. So after working with different groups of community in Sơn Trà, I figured out education that focusing on school children could be also a small areas, but also an important area. So I moved to LVDI International to work in education in 2021. And this organization work based on volunteers. Some of my volunteers also be here with me today. But my story that have been known by people is from the 8 years that I working to save the habitat, the home range of the red-sang Duke langur, the species that you see here, a Duke mother and a baby living in Sơn Trà with their families. And thanks for this story, I have been recognized as the hotspot hero in 2020. And I am sure that my story could inspire other people that they also can work with their community to save the habitat for a species. And I hope this story will be benefit for the peatland also. So talk about the background of wildlife consumption and the forest situation in Vietnam is not really good as well. This map I get from ENV just last few weeks, that the report from data of ENV during the last 7 years about wildlife crime in the cities, and based on the consumptions of local community, it keep raising, right? Even we have been doing a lot of raising awareness activities, and also the policy have been changed, but also the wildlife consumption is keep been raising. And this is one of the pictures of the Duke langurs in Sơn Trà. So my place, it was hunted in 2015. But luckily, this was the last case that we figure out the ducks were hunted since we start doing here in Sơn Trà. Talking about the forest, the situation of forest in Vietnam is that right now, even the areas of forest have been planted, it's been raising, but the quality of the forest is really poor. So here is the data from the rangers department that I get a screenshot from WWF, the report on Vietnam biodiversity published on in October of 2021. The quality of forests in 2016 of Vietnam is like these areas is about like rich forest. This one is really poor. This is the poor forest, and this is the medium forest. So we can see like we just have these areas is a rich forest that in like primary forest that animals they can live peacefully in there, right? In the other side, the primary forests were transferred into planted forests is keeping raising. So sometimes people say like the forest cover the land, it's keeping raising, but that's how it look like. So from primary forest, we somehow transfer and into the planted forest. So for me in conservation, it's not good anymore. So even we try to plant trees, we try to plant forests, but we also have to save and protect the last primary forests that left in the nature for wildlife they can live. So with the story in my Sơn Trà Peninsula, here is Sơn Trà areas. So this is the Da Nang city, one of the most beautiful city, beach city in the world here. And we also have a peninsula where have a really high biodiversity in the regions. Even in the like small areas of about like 4,300 hectares, but we have more than 366 animal species that in red books and being protected by the law, and more than 1,000 plant species that figure out like more than 400 plant species and medical species. So this areas is small but also very high biodiversity. So what wrong with these areas? And you know, like every areas with the good views or with the good for the investment, which will be always in endangered. The top issues of these areas, like somebody will try to take a piece for their investment. So these pictures that we took from Google Maps, and it keep opening every year. This road they make to bring more vehicle to the forest that will build something in there. This areas already have been, you know, like clear to build the resorts, hotels. Luckily, we have stopped it in 2017 and trust from the tourists. Is when someone invests in these protected areas, they will try to bring more guests, and then they can get more money from guests, right? So more trust, more noise, more pollution in these areas, and then animals and plant species cannot live anymore. So that just in case I forget, so Sơn Trà is a protected areas. It was protected by the laws in 1941, and during the time, by some decisions, it had been transferred into development land, planted forests, something like that. And now the core areas for forests at the time that we start fighting for Sơn Trà is only about a half. So it nearly a half had been taken for building resort and for tourism activities. And we cannot just stay there and look at our treasures will gone somehow. So at that areas we identify like what kind of the community groups that we should involve in this story, because we cannot do it alone. We cannot just with some conservationists go somewhere and talk to the community like let's save the forest. Actually, we tried in 2012 and 2013, and we bring some nice pictures of the red sand look like that, and we talk to the restaurants, we talk to the local people, and they said like, oh, Sanja is quite ugly, dusty, just rat, nothing else. So why is it important for the community? Yeah, but it's true, right? Only conservationists or environmentalists can see the importance of the nature. So how we can protect that areas with only us, with a group of people? So we think that we can only find the way, like identify the groups of community, and we give a hope that we can find other people like us in these groups and join with us. So we start the data, we start a broad group to see like what is their barriers, what is their understanding about the situation, what is their perceptions. And we how it can bring money to them. That is the key questions. The other thing is the norms. The only thing like someone powerful has been already taken the land. They cannot take it back. And they cannot do anything to keep the land and just let it go. Someone, they have the knowledge, they understand about the situation, they understand about the policy, but they have no interest in saving the nature. Someone, they have interest, but they don't have abilities. For example, like they don't know like how to approach with the policy system to change the policy, something like that. Someone don't have the opportunities, someone don't have the motivation. So when we figure out and identify the barriers of each group, and we start creating a strategy to abroad and to engage more community in our missions. We start with the easy groups because at that time we don't really have much money or investment from the grants, the projects, or from the business. So we start with the easy group that is college students. This group is kind of like mostly free, don't really need money. And they have a big network that can spread our message, and also give us motivation that there's somebody to stay with us. After that, we think that the media in Vietnam is quite powerful, but they also don't really see the importance of biodiversity. So we engage the educate the media by bring them to the mountain, show them the beautiful species, the important species, and create the stories for them to feature on their media. So slowly we start engage them in the story of the nature, and they start seeing the interested story in that. With this preparation, in the next year, when we start involve the influencer groups, like some important guys in the business groups or some champions in the government groups. So the media also keep having the story to feature, and also the champions, they also have the channels for them to spread out their message. At that time, we think that we already have some champions, and now we should create the opportunities and motivation for them to fight for Sanja. So we create some events and workshops to gather people, gather the scientists, gather government groups to talk to each other. So we just are the facilitators to create those things, to create the areas, the forums, the dialogues for them to discuss and to figure out what's wrong with us when we let that beautiful habitat to something else, not something that benefit for the community. And after that, we just support the champions so that they can speak out. So we got quite impressive achievements. Sometimes it's like over expectation. For example, like many exhibitions of the red sandok start being held along the city with different people, even someone that we have not known about them, but they was inspired by someone else. And the Duklangas appear on in the roads, in the bus station, in the arts gallery, and help us to spread out the message of saving the Duk in Sanja. In 2016, even the city chairman used the Duk pictures in his New Year card to send to all the government officers. So surprised. He also chose the Duklangas staff to give to international guests when they join the Asian Big Games in Da Nang. This is also a big surprise. We also have some effort in helping the Duklanger to become the icon of the city in the APEC summit, at the really famous summit that would be held in Da Nang, and that would be also the pride of the Da Nang people. So this is some examples of what we have prepared here. It had been achieved here. So since 2016, the Duk has been recognized as the icon of the city unofficially. So of course, this could not be recorded in the paper or anything, but it's in the logos, in the events, in the stuff, it's everywhere. So we think from that time we can talk about the policy, how to change the policy to protect the red sanduk and the habitat in Sanja permanently. So that means like longer. So we start organize the support the champions to organize the workshop, the talk show for them to speak out and work with the media to spread their message even to the national government, not only in the city. So some inspiring story from that time, for example, this is Mr. Huỳnh Tấn Vinh. He's a chairman of Tourism Association. He is also a powerful man in the city. He's the CEO of the Kurama Resort. So basically, he's from the business side, but somehow he also loves Sanja, and he also have the perception that if we can keep the nature, we can even have the better tourism activities for the city. We don't really remember how did we brought him before, but we remember that we brought his daughter first, and his daughter is also someone who loves nature, and then he's also love nature and he loves Sanja, and then we work together, and he's the really good gapper between the business groups and conservation groups to help us to talk to other people in business side. This is also an inspiring story, not because of these Asian myths, but because of the guy who is like an owner of a coffee shop, and he had the connection with the Miss competitors. And then after the Asian Miss competition, he invited all of them to his coffee shop, and then that is their first time to know about the red sanduk, and they was inspired with the story that we are protecting the red sanduk. And from that time, they keep talking about the Duk and keep talking about saving nature in Sunda Peninsula. We also have another inspiring story from magazine. So at that time, as you know, it was really precious for magazine to print a story about Sunda when we are like in a fight. But this magazine, they even organize the press release, they organize the press conference and invite the champions to their conference to talk about Sunda. And they keep writing about Sunda story and the progress of fighting for Sunda in their magazine. Later on, I figured out like the owner of this magazine is the wife of a member of association in that will speak in the national government about the things in the local areas. So that is why they have the connection and they have the story that they want to save Sanja. So sometimes it's really amazing that the connection from our story it had been spread to some people that we cannot imagine that we can approach them. So after that campaign, my lesson learned is that the first one, we have been successful in using the flagship species as a connection to the raw attentions of different groups and also inspire them to fight for a habitat at a home range of this species. So in this case, we use the red sandalwood langurs as the flagship species to draw people together. The second thing that we have learned that it really works is that we are conservationists, right? We know about nature, we know about biodiversity, we know about forests, about species, but there's a lot of things that we also have to know if we want to save a habitat. So in this case, we have some gappers. We have somebody in the business groups that they also love nature. They could be our champions. They could be our gappers. We also have somebody in the government side that also love the nature can transfer our message to some important guy that we cannot approach. So we have identified the champions and find a way to support them to send the message, and it really works. The last one is the public relations. So during those times, during our champions is working hardly somewhere else, we keep the public understand about the story and support the story. So these three lessons have been supported a lot during our champion. It could be say like 8 years. Then we now can confidently say like the duck had been saved in Sanja. I know the topic today we talk about the PFP, the peatland, but what I think that I can recommend for the PFP missions from my story is that like when we want to start something, when we want to start saving an areas, we know that we cannot work alone, right? We should mobilize the participation from all the community groups. So the first step should be always like identify all the target groups. Even there are some groups that we have no idea how to work with them now, but we know that they are there. They are part of the community. They have the role there. And we just identify all the groups. And then step by step, based on our resources, we will choose the prioritized groups. We start with the groups that we think it fit with us that times. Sometimes there are some way that we think it's really effective, but at that time we don't have enough resources, then we have to put it later. And the third step is like we empower to those groups and try to facilitate, try to remind, try to give them the motivation, try to create the opportunity for them to do their jobs, because that is their habitat, that is their land, that is their job to save the land. So if we are a part of the community, we have our part, we have our work, but if not, we will facilitate so they can save their areas. And that, I think that could be really helpful. Because at the end, if they are successful in saving the land, they will be proud of. That is their effort, that is their work, right? And then they will live with that pride forever. And I think that could be the best way to save a land. Yeah. So that's my story, and I hope that my story have been benefit for you. And if you have any questions, you can share with me. Thank you for your listening. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chang. That was such an interesting share and really inspiring, like what you've done for the community and for the langurs themselves. And it's so cool how they ultimately became the icon of the area is ultimately a lesson in marketing strategy for conservation. So I think that's a really cool thing to share. And I hope everyone listening has kind of learned something about, how to engage with the community to ultimately create change and potentially influence culture, So thank you so much for sharing. And if you have any questions for Ms. Chang, please put them in the chat box because we'll be addressing them at the Q&A shortly. So thanks so much, Ms. Chang. All right, so before we head to our next speaker, we have another quick poll kind of based on what we just heard from Ms. Chang. So I'm going to run the poll now. And the question is, have you experienced either culture or sustenance taking precedence over the conservation of peatlands in your area? Whether that's a yes, no, or if you're unsure, or if you haven't experienced it, let us know. But yeah, I mean, I already have some questions for Ms. Chang for later, but I'll save them for later. A lot of interesting stuff that was addressed just now. Okay, I'll give you guys a couple more minutes to just fill in the poll. Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite interesting how, for today's topic especially, right? How do you balance culture, sustenance, and conservation? It's kind of a very fine balance to achieve, right? Okay. About almost more than half of you have filled in our poll. And I will end it right here. So we've got a nice mixed bag of experience here. So about 40% of you are not really sure if you've experienced that. And then, the other 35% haven't experienced it. And then 24% of you have. So quite interesting. I think we've got also a mix of people here. Some people from, the conservation side, but some people from the academic side. So very cool to see your experience. So if you have any specific experience, feel free to share with us in the chat box. I'd be really interested to hear about it. Okay, so that calls it for our poll. So next up, I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, who has been very active in the Malaysian NGO space, and he's worked tirelessly in the areas of poverty alleviation and community development among the Orang Asli, which is the indigenous peoples, and the urban poor at both grassroots and policy levels. And he has a background in law and a master's in social development from the University of Sussex under a prestigious Chevening scholarship. So that is Mr. Kon On Sen, and he's the managing director of Yayasan Kajian dan Pembangunan Masyarakat, which stands for Foundation for Community Studies and Development, also known as YKPM, just the acronym. And YKPM, fun fact, is also currently part of PFP's Business Hub Cohort 2 Accelerator program. And so since 2015, he has pioneered a groundbreaking shared prosperity community enterprise in natural farming and Orang Asli empowerment to address the challenges of widening inequality and climate change. So one of the outcomes of this is a very successful social enterprise known as OA Organic. And he joins us today to share some of the successes of his journey alongside these communities. So Mr. Kon, hi, Mr. Kon.
Hi,
welcome.
Thank you so much, Mariam. I'm so happy and feel so privileged to be able to share some of our experiences with this platform today. My apologies, I couldn't join in right from the beginning, but I managed to catch some of Trung's sharing, and that was really, really impressive to hear that. I'm going to show a short video of 2 minutes first, and then come into the topic. But before that, I would like to make it stated upfront at the onset that for the Orang Asli, culture and conservation are actually interrelated and intertwined. And I believe that they will mutually actually support each other. But before we go into that topic in a little bit more detail, let me show you what we do and give you a visual so you understand the narrative that I will be sharing a little bit after that. And then it'll make a lot more, give you a bit more context, visuals and understanding, and then we can go into the topic more deeply. Okay, with that, may I start sharing this video? Let's bear with me. It's gonna take, oh, sorry, I forgot to let me do that again. I'm gonna tick 2 boxes. Shared sound and optimized clip. Irene was teaching me on that. And okay. Oh no. I shared the wrong. Yes, that's the one I want to share. Oh, here it is. Okay, enlarge screen. And here we are. Enjoy this video.
OA Organic is one of a kind Orang Asli shared prosperity farm. Through setting up a collective farm enterprise, it shaped a model of shared wealth. People are put before profits, and those left behind share fairly in the enterprise. OA Organic has built fair markets and a bottom-up economy, uplifting the Orang Asli from poverty, unifying and strengthening community action and leadership. In this process, the Orang Asli have been mobilized to sustain their forests, restore their creator-given role and identity to sustain the environment, combat climate change, and create wealth for the nation. In short, OA Organic has created a pathway of hope, humanizing profit-making, putting people and planet in the center of businesses.
Ada perubahan dalam kita punya hidup dan kita ada contoh kenderaan pun kita dah dapat beli satu motosikal lah.
Rumah saya yang buruk tu nak ubah menjadi boleh besar sikit lah, boleh anak selesa main dalam rumah tu, memberi kata orang pun kelengkapan pada anak-anak, terutamanya nak menyediakan peralatan sekolah dia orang. Kita tak payah susah macam dulu. Kalau dulu memang sangat stres lah saya fikir, sebab kita hanya bergantung pada getah yang tak luas kan, tak cukup.
Masa dulu nak pakai baju pun susah, kena pakai baju koyak-koyak. Sekarang ni semenjak tanam sayur ni ada duit sikit, bolehlah anak saya bertukar soal baju. Lepas tu duit pun macam adalah simpan sikit-sikit.
Oh, okay. So I hope you enjoyed that video. It's really about trying to create a business model that's people and planet centered, and ensuring that the Orang Asli and the indigenous people of West Malaysia get a fair and equitable share of the profit in the value chain. And means linking them to fair markets. So that's what we do. Now, let me quickly move on to the slides and share that one. Here we are. Let's go to PowerPoint. Oh, I've here we go. All right, here we are. My name is Kon On Sin. I'm a director with this YKPM, which stands for Foundation for Community Studies and Development. One of our key projects is to help them develop a sustainable livelihood community enterprise that will uplift the whole community, not just individuals, and how to shape these livelihood enterprises in line with their culture, and at the same time equip and enable them to conserve and sustain their environment. So that was the challenge I was laying before us. So in this pack of slides, there'll be come in 3 parts: the challenges to help you understand the context, the model and the solution, and the part 3 will be the impact. So let's first look at the challenges that the Orang Asli face. The Orang Asli, for your information, are the poorest of the poor in Malaysian society, and they are located mainly in West Malaysia. They consist of 18 ethnic groups, and they only form about 0.5% of the total population of Malaysia. So there are three areas where land degradation, deforestation has caused them loss of diversity and natural resources. It has caused increased emissions of carbon, changing microclimates, and resulting in multi-dimensional poverty. So one of the first ways that affects them badly is the polluting of their drinking water sources and rivers, where there's mining or sediments from logging. They're one of the immediate impact upon the Orang Asli is that their water gets contaminated. Secondly, as a result of deforestation, food is diminished, and livelihood opportunities also reduce as a result of that. Loss of herbal medicines, higher temperatures, microclimates change, and drought and flooding is also often happening in their midst. But one thing that's even less known is that not only do they lose their livelihoods, the forest is actually their bank, their warehouse or storehouses, because they don't have banks, they don't have storehouses, and their currency of their pension, as it were, is actually the forest. All the wealth and riches are stored there. And when the environment and the forest is destroyed, it's actually quite devastating, because their whole future security is also lost in that. And then consequential to that is the loss of culture, identity, and hope. And I joke, you know, in an urban setting, if you take away their livelihoods, but not only just you take away their livelihoods, you take away their bank account and all their savings in security, people in the urban center would jump from apartments or condominiums. But for the Orang Asli, they can't even climb up a tree and to jump. So it's really tragic. So it's in this backdrop, what solutions can we find to help them move out of this conundrum and this challenge that they face? So we're looking at, we have to address two big issues here: the economic divide and an ecological collapse of the environment. And so the livelihood solution, or what I call the shared prosperity model, is required to find such a solution to help them navigate through these very, very difficult waters. And one of the critical, I think the uniqueness of what we do is in this profit sharing mechanism. But because this talk is also on culture, it was also important not just to enable the Orang Aslis to have a fair share of the supply chain value, but also to locate it in terms of the culture. So, for example, the Orang Asli, they are forest people. They are not village people. They are not urban people. And so when we try to fit them and design livelihood programs or strategies that give them a house and a piece of land to do some farming, to make some income, and we think that will do well for a village person or even for an urban settler, and think that they will be able to move on and progress and adapt to modernity. But that's not true, because for them, the Orang Asli being forest people, the forest is part and parcel of who they are. It is part of their identity. They are forest people. And so without the forest, they feel that they are not complete, they are not whole. And so there's a deep void. And so we realize that the livelihood design also had to take into account, how do we design in such a way that the forest is still part of this livelihood enterprise. And remember, I said from the onset that culture and forest and conservation are actually mutually interrelated and mutually strengthen each other as well. And it's simply this, that because their worldview and their culture is that nature is part of them. It is a gift of the creator for them, and they are part of it. They're part of creation and they're part of nature. It is intertwined. They have to look after nature. They see it as an important role in their life to nurture nature, so that nature in turn nurture humanity. And so when we design this model of organic farming, it very much needs to nurture the environment. It doesn't put chemicals in to destroy it. And more so, not only in nurturing it in a way that doesn't damage the soil, it also prevents the way that we've structured the profit sharing and the economic profits, that they can earn 2,000 to 3,000 on less than 1 acre of land. Whereas in the past, they had to chop 6 acres, 8 acres of trees, planting monocrops to be able to reach a sustainable livelihood amount to be able to gain enough income for one family. But now with less than 1 acre, they can sustain a whole family with this approach. So there's now no longer the need to chop so many trees, and they can, as a result of that, they can organize themselves to be more productive on a smaller piece of land, and yet at the same time protect and conserve the forest. So in this model, when we did a study, the conventional supply chain is that the farmers, Orang Asli farmers, would only get about 20% of the retail price in their whatever activity. It may not even just be in terms of farm produce, agriculture. It was also in handicraft and other things. Middlemen would catch about 30%, the retail for 30%, then you factor in your transport cost of 10% and probably a wastage of 10%, so you get 100%. What we did, we redesigned the business model, turn it upside down, a bottoms-up approach, where now the farmers get the lion's share of 40% of the retail price, and probably benefits in terms of training, support, and retail getting 25%, and OA Organics, where we now act as the new middle person, as it were, to facilitate all these, only capture 15%. And again, the other things, wastage and transport costs, remain constant. So with this, the Orang Aslis were now able to earn so much more. And let's look at the impact. So over the years, 72 farmers have been trained. Not everyone has retained. We probably had about 50% dropout, but 15 households are active farmers, probably consisting about 36 farmers. We noticed that their income has increased 2 or 3 times, and they're using that surplus to buy washing machines, clothes, expansion of their houses, and even scaling up their farms. In terms of environmental protection, the higher income on smaller, as I was saying about, they're earning on half an acre, 1 acre is adequate to gain enough income for their families. So they're no longer cutting as many trees as they used to. The soil fertility is maintained because we teach them organic farming methods or natural farming methods. And as a result of that, the forest is better protected. So give you an example for this, it was June 2022, we found that half the households were earning 1,400 plus and above per month. And those who were working less were probably only working 1, 2, 3 hours a day, and it was complementing an existing livelihood strategy. So all in all, they were earning between 2,000 to 3,000 ringgit per month as a result of this intervention. The question you may ask is now, how does this actually protect the environment? Not only, as I said, not only do they now have the option to choose not to chop so many trees divert into a livelihood that can gain them as much income as these large acres of monocrops, but it also now enabled them to come together with the surplus income. They could now strengthen the community numbers. We had about probably 25% participation of the community in farming. Not everyone is interested in vegetable farming. So, but with that 25%, they were now able to form what I call the minority majority. And with that 25%, with their friends, their neighbors, and their relatives, they were now able to get a simple majority of 51% and above, and be able to address the bigger issues of land encroachment, land protection, and forest conservation. In the past, they were very divided, and in order to find solutions, to make decisions that are involving the whole community, you needed to reach this majority. And because they're so fragmented, it's very, very difficult. However, as a result of these interventions, it has been able to bring the farmers together. They were able to understand each other better, work together more closely, and through awareness and training programs, they saw a way in which they could now protect their forests and deal with these big issues of land encroachment. So as a result of that, they built their team, they formed committee, and they started community mapping. They brought in the young people and the old people together to start mapping out communities, developing protocols. And here's the young people getting involved. And so they got about 80% participation of the community. And now with that, they are in the process of looking into the do's and don'ts of their own culture, their adat or traditions of, for example, when they go fishing, they can't use tuba or a type of tree poison. So the fish stock doesn't get diminished. When they clear land, there are certain rules and adat in line with the culture that it should be done in a way that is sustainable. The trees have to be a certain size before they can cut it, and they cannot use it for commercial purposes. So the forest gets preserved, but now they have a document that gives them a point to agree and take action collectively, whereas in the past it was almost impossible to do that without a majority consensus. And so finally, let's look at the impact on well-being and hope, right? That this is really at the crux of it, and the income and all that is all good. But it's really about re-establishing the dignity, the well-being, and restoring hope so that they can now find their own solutions forward. It's in this village where this intervention took place, incomes have doubled. They've got savings to build, extend houses, top up pocket money for their children, clothes, uniform, be able to afford nutritious food, vehicles. And we noticed that originally they started working 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, but now, and they were earning 400, 800. Now, with some of them having acquired, being more confident and had time to develop those skills, half of them are working 4 to 6 hours and earning 1,500 and above, and some even 2,000. So that's given them hope. A critical point here on culture that we also had to be careful about is that the Orang Asli is a very flat, equal society, very egalitarian. Harmony, living in harmony is a very important value in their worldview and in their culture. And so, for example, when they go into the forest to go hunting, they bring the spoils back. They share it out among the whole community. And so we had to design the livelihood in such a way as well that it did not benefit just 1 or 2 people. It had to be designed in such a way that anybody who wanted to participate could participate and benefit from this livelihood project. And so in that way, the profits could be shared more equitably, and strengthen this value that they have. So this concept of gotong royong, working together, concepts that are designed into the model, and in alignment to their culture. And this is Maimun, one of our one of the lead farmers. She had, I mean, due to poverty and circumstances, she had to drop out of school at standard 1 at the age of 7. But she is now been appointed to be the chair of the farming committee. She is also the highest earning farmer. She gets about 2,000 a month, and without working too hard, reasonably, but not too hard. And we are amazed at how she's able to organize the farmers together. There are about 7 families that she organizes and inspires and lead. And so this is a wonderful example of a livelihood project that those without an education can still be as successful as those who work in urban centers with a degree. Some of the most inspiring stories I've seen among the Orang Aslis. I remember I met an elderly Orang Asli, and he too had a very tough life. The wife was not mentally stable. They had a 2-year-old child that passed away due to some fits. They could not get medical attention fast enough. And I remember one day having a conversation with him, and some elephants had come to destroy some of his crops. And so I felt, I wanted to ask him how he felt. And he said, the elephant also needs food. And so it's okay that when they run out of food, that they have to come and take my crops. It is part of life. It's part of, he didn't say it in so many words, but the understanding is this: he saw the animals and the elephants as part and parcel of his world, not as an enemy, but part and parcel of the world. And it was, and therefore all that we have was to be shared with everyone, not just with one another, but also with animals. And I thought the generosity of the poor is amazing. Their worldview and understanding of life, is so contrasting with the world that we have. We see this world as a competition. The early bird gets the worm, and therefore it's always being a hit of the other. But for them, it's not. The world, there is enough for everybody. It's a world where it is to be shared. And even though with so little, they believe in sharing. And so that was, I thought, wonderful things that we need to learn from their culture. And as a result of that, how they are able to sustain environment for the good of all. So let's look at some figures here. 50%, this is a World Bank report. 50% of nature contributes towards global GDP. That means nature's assets, the environment, our forest, and all of nature contributes as much as 50% towards global GDP. Secondly, there are also strong international studies to show that deforestation is slowed down 5 times more where there are indigenous people managing the land than any other group of people. So when you put these two findings together, you realize that the Orang Asli, the indigenous people, are the best people and our best partners to conserve the forests, fight climate change, and also to grow the economy. And so that's the privilege that we have in working in partnership with the Orang Asli. And if we can bring them on and recognize that they are natural, gifted, and the term is leaders in nature's economy. So we can recognize that rather than see them as people who need to be relocated, moved in the name of progress, to see that they are part of the solution to grow our economy, to grow, to make progress, and to protect the environment for all. It's not climate justice just for the orang asli. It's not just protecting the forest for the orang asli. It's actually protecting the forest and climate justice for all, because everyone is affected in the process. And so they are the best people as our and partners to uplift poverty, sustain the forest, combat climate change, sustain the economy, not just sustain but grow the economy, and find and contribute towards food security. So so culture, their worldview and culture actually strengthens and reinforces the conservation of the environment, and vice versa. And here it is. They were another angle where they presented before. This was the National Steering Committee of the UNDP SGP program. And so the way forward, where we're trying to move it now, we are finding that the models are maturing, they're doing well, they are able to improve the income, they're equipping the orang asli to protect the environment, and we're moving them to set up, scaling up to provide for more villages to replicate, increasing fair markets. We're thinking of creating a central collection space now to serve 20 villages, and repeat and replicate this model. And so, and before I end, the question is, how does it actually protect the peat land as well? Well, one good thing is this: once they are able to earn a decent income and livelihood through what I call the green economy, they no longer need to compromise in the sensitive areas like peat land areas. And because they are able to gain enough income from the small pieces of land that they have, they don't need to destroy the peat land, exploit it, and damage the peatland areas. And so by supporting them in developing fair markets, businesses which are bottoms up, where people and planet are the center of it, and they are able to gain enough, they in turn will be able to protect the environment, including the peatland areas, and not compromise that for other crops, just to make a living. And so all in all, it comes as a whole package. Culture, livelihoods, and conservation of all the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kon. What a sharing session. That was really, really inspiring. And thank you so much for sharing all those, individual stories of the different, orang asli folks and how they really made transformational change. And you've been a part of that. And I love how, you also talked about, instead of trying to apply, say an urban structure to their business model, how about we incorporate, what they're used to doing, like, profit sharing, so that they, are already fitting into that, rather than trying to make, a rigid model work for them and then say, oh, why aren't they, why isn't it working for them? It's actually adapting to what they already know and what's best suited to them. And that's where you really see success. So I think that approach is really wonderful and really cool to see. And I love also how you talk about the profit protection and then inclusion, right? Because that's also something we at TRCRC, as well as People for Peat, really believe in, that, our indigenous peoples are some of the best people to steward the land in conservation. So I think we've got a lot of things to talk about in our Q&A session and our discussion. So thank you again so much for sharing that, Mr. Kon. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And I know we already have a lot of questions in our chat box, which is great. But before that, I want to run a quick poll because Mr. Kon shared some really interesting stats. And we also wanted to ask our audience, right? Because similar to what you shared earlier today, Indigenous people comprise of less than 5% of the world's population. But how much global diversity do they actually protect? That's something you shared earlier, and the numbers are quite astonishing. And that's why it's so important to kind of make sure that whatever work that we're doing in conservation really integrates with the Indigenous population so that, you know, because they are the best suited to continue the conservation. Awesome. So I'll give some people, this is kind of almost like a quiz less than a poll, just to see if you're paying attention or if you've heard yourself about what's been going on with, you know, the global Indigenous populations and how involved they are in conservation. I think just sharing that stat is quite an interesting one. So I'm gonna end the poll and then just share the results. And so about 43% of you said that they comprise of 50% of the global diversity that they're protecting, but actually the answer is 80%. That's how much the Indigenous population is responsible for protecting, which is quite astounding. And so that kind of speaks again back to what Mr. Kon was saying about how we really need to engage with the Orang Asli populations and try and make sure that whatever we're doing, business models and stuff, we're including them. So because they are some of the sort of gatekeepers of our conservation. So thanks for sharing that. And now I think we can get into our long-awaited Q&A session. And if we could bring back Ms. Chang as well, that would be great. Awesome. So we have some questions already brewing in the chat box. And I'm going to kind of just start off with one of the first questions. And this was put by Irene earlier. And this is directly to Ms. Chang. And so she asked, what inspired you to start protecting the Duk Langur? And do you have a personal story to share?
Thank you for your questions. I myself actually have a personal interest with animals. Even in my daily life, I also work in the rescue for cats and dogs and other bird species, something like that. So even when I was just in the university, I already thought that I will work in conservation. But when I start with Sunja Peninsula, I think that I see the how to say, the story, and I think that could really helpful for saving that habitat. We can have different solutions to save a habitat, to save a land. But in that story, when I see like the Duk Langur population, they live in that peninsula. They are kind of close to that areas, and that area is also close to the human activities. It's about just like half an hour, and then local people, they can observe the species. So I think that could be a good example if to show the people, like if you protect the land, good or bad. So I think choose that area is also a good reason to inspire people about conservation. Like what you do, you will see directly. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I also wanted to know if, you know, the langurs, were they hunted as part of local culture, or was it more of like an economic reason because of the wildlife trade?
Before, so it's like before 2000 something, they hunt langurs like monkey, you know, like monkey for making the medical glues, kind of the medicine for using. Vietnamese people and Chinese people used to use those things. But the last one that I observed was hunted in 2015, and that is the last case that we observed. Later on, the biggest issues is that the land were taken for tourism activities. kind of like huge areas, about like 60, 70 hectares were taken for building resorts, things like that. So the langurs and other species, they lost their area to live. And that is a peninsula, that means they cannot move to anywhere. So that could be a really dangerous issues.
Yeah, because they're isolated in that one area, and once they're gone for good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very precarious situation. And so I noticed also in your presentation, there was quite a lot of, you involved the community, you involved business folks, and was that also specifically a youth involvement as well?
We start with the youth first, because they have the huge network. They are in the university. They also can participate big groups in some public events. So we start with them in 2012, 2013 first, to spread out the network and the message about the importance of the Red Sang Duk and the Sunda Peninsula. And once the public already known that there something happened with the ducks in Sunda, and then we working with the media is the second step.
I see your strategy there. Thank you
start
for
with
sharing.
something cheap and can spread out strong first.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next question, and this is from Mr. Khan, and this comes from Mariam Kadir. And Mariam Kadir asks, hi, Mr. Khan, are you open in applying your technique in other areas or states of Malaysia?
Yeah, thank you. I would say yes, I would like to, but we are actually quite a small outfit, and we are really being very stretched already as it is. It's not just about teaching them livelihood strategies, helping them organize themselves, understanding the issues, working with them to formulate the solutions, identifying what are the local contextual things that they can do that can bring them this desired livelihood solution that they would like, and then helping them find fair markets and ensuring that those the building the capacity, strengthen the ability to move the economy of scale, are very labor intensive, and so part of the solution is that we are fighting on all fronts, from capacity building to training, production capabilities, to marketing, fair markets, and then management skills. And that's taking a lot of time. Having said that, I think we are in a position now that because our methods have proven to have been working, they are better, almost self-managing their farming collective. They are learning skills to understand the market better. We are now moving into a phase where there are about 20 villages where we are. So we're now trying to locate another central collection spot, central to all these 20 villages. And so that now we can expand and scale it up to all these 20 villages nearby. So that's probably within our capacity, but it means bringing in more resources, bringing in more people to provide the extension services, provide training, and increase the market. Whether we can move it to another state, I mean, it would be ideal. But my experience is we need to build strong models that are very stable, successful, and once that we've reached economy of scale, then it can move on to the second phase of it being replicated in other parts of the state. So yes, but unfortunately, I'm just a human being, Mariam, and I have to acknowledge my limitations here.
Definitely, Mr. Khan. If anyone in the audience has some either expertise or willingness to contribute, maybe they can put their hands up and connect with you, Mr. Khan, because this is such a great initiative, and it would be great to see it in a scalable way. But I understand, of course, the growth has to be measured, right, and phase by phase. So that's totally understandable. We have another question here for Mr. Ilham Abla. And his question is, Mr. Kon, the area you worked in, was it in peatlands or nearby? And he says, interesting method that you presented, which I agree.
Yeah, yes. Yes, where we are, we're a bit inland. So, but we do have peatland areas. And I would say these are more freshwater peatland areas. But they're not very big. I mean, that's one village that's about 50 acres. There are other parts that are 10 acres or 1 acre, but they are kind of spread out and not necessarily all in one place. So in their community forest, or some people call it NCR, native customary right land, their hunting ground, their housing, their burial sites. Well, within that locality of their NCR land, there will be spots of peatland. And so one of the things that TRCR did was, I thought was very good. They brought in their expertise and shared with the Orang Asli leaders the importance of peatland and the important role that peatland plays in sequestration of carbon, in fighting climate change, in filtering water. And so it was such a confidence booster for them that they realized that their cultural methods of conserving peatland and the environment it's so important to all of life, and now they could understand why they did what they did, why they had these culture practices, these livelihood adats, traditions, and understanding that they were important, and that it reinforced their importance and the dignity in society. You know, often people point them, oh, you are backward, what you're doing is actually non-productive, it's not important, you need to become, to be modernized, you need to integrate into modern society, and not realizing what they are doing. It's so important for all of society. And so when the sciences come to give them a better understanding of why they do what they do is so important, it gives them, restores back that dignity and the pride, and the pride to be an Orang Asli.
Absolutely, I love that. Is it like what Mr. Kon was talking about is actually part of People for Peat's Peat Ranger training program, where we had a few of the leaders of the Orang Asli community come to our capacity building. And there we talked about, you know, the importance of peatlands in terms of water management, fire management, and sustainable livelihoods, which they are already doing with the Orang Asli program with YKPM. And I think, thank you for sharing that feedback, Mr. Kon, about how it's been validating to them as well, of how important that culture is, right? Of like, oh, we knew this already, but now the science is also backing it up. And yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for bringing up that example. So another question I think that I can direct to both of you, and maybe starting with Miss Chang, is, you know, what is the biggest challenge that you faced in protecting either, you know, the Lango, or in Mr. Kon's case, in approaching the Orang Asli community? So maybe we start with Chang first. What was the biggest challenge you faced in protecting the Duk Lango?
Thank you. Actually, the biggest challenge in our area is that the interest conflict. So between the business groups that they want to on that peninsula for business activities, for mass tourism activities. So they already do a lot of lobby activity to take the land, even that is the protected areas. But somehow during about 10 years before we start doing something, they have done a lot of lobby activities, and they get the piece of land for their activities. So when we started joining, and the second challenge is so up is that the local community, they accept that they cannot take the land back. That is not the protected areas, and they just think that they just let it go, and they will have no power in taking the land back.
Mhm.
So one side we have to figure out like how is the situation with the land. The other side is like we have to like strengthen the capacities of the local community so that they can join with us. Because if not, if they don't join with us, we have no idea how we can fight. Because in that case, it's really like unbalanced between the business groups and local community groups.
Thank you for sharing. I think land rights is such a huge issue in conservation, and I think that spans both your project as well as Mr. Khan's project. Because ultimately, if people don't have access to the land or if they don't have rights to the land, then their hands are tied, right? They're not able to partake in that conservation. So going back to Mr. Khan, do you have any comments about Orang Asli land rights? I'm sure there's plenty. That's like a whole symposium topic in itself.
Big topic.
Yeah.
So land is actually the most important concern for the Orang Asli. And I think it stems back to our view of economic development and growth. Our pursuit of economic growth has been divorced from nature. And we see building the economy, GDP, is more important than protecting nature. And so as a result of that, lands get exploited in a non-sustainable way. Logging is done in non-sustainable ways, damaging the land, not just damaging the people. So that is one area where we are now rethinking, and I'm glad with the big issues of climate change, people are seeing that nature and economics are intertwined. They cannot be separated. And so now, how do we do it in a way that is balanced? Okay, so that's one. I think that's a discourse that's now taking place at a global and hopefully more so at the local level. The second area which I find that is also doing damage is that the perception of the indigenous people in Orang Asli that they are anti-development, they're lazy and they don't want progress. And we're still in, some of them perceive that the Orang Asli through their slash and burn are actually causing more damage and carbon emissions and resulting in haze. But imagine, they've been doing that for years. And actually the way of cut and slash emulates nature, because nature, when it takes down trees, when the trees get too aged and too old, they fall down with the strong winds. But they regenerate, but it's done in small proportions, small parts. And so it's never done in such a way, it's of such large scale that it brings any damage to nature or climate change. But the way that the today, where logging is done, it's done in hundreds and thousands of acres. And so, of course, when that happens, climate change will result. For hundreds of years, nothing has happened. And in the last 50 years, with a much more aggressive style of commercialization of the forest and logging methods, we find this phenomena of climate change. So it's very selective in way that they try and paint the Orang Asli or the indigenous people as the bad person, as a perpetrator of climate change, while actually looking at the evidence, it points otherwise. And so how do we help this narrative that's being driven by those who want to exploit the land to make short-term profits, to see that the Orang Asli are the best people to protect the forest? And so therefore, how, instead of taking a strategy, just relocate them, how do we work with them to build the economy, to do it in such a way that there can be growth? It will sustain the economy, but not only will it sustain the economy, but from our experiment, it shows that they can grow the economy. Imagine with the vegetables that they're growing, when they sell it to the market, there's a multiplier effect of 4 times when it gets to the market in the urban center. It creates jobs, it creates wealth for more people in the urban center and sustains the city. It provides food security. It addresses climate change. So, once you do the maths of how much profit you gain from logging, but how much do you are not recorded in the accounting books of these corporate bodies that damage your water sources, that damage the air. And these are invisible costs that have never been put into the accounting books of global GDP. And in our recent floods, we spent 6 billion in mitigation damages. That is far, far greater than any logging concessions and profits that have been gained from that. So I think there needs to be a more transparent, honest relook at the economy and the trajectory of development approaches, and to see what really brings the best benefit. And there are some studies now by some very notable scientists, 100 of them I understand, who have shown that on the cost-benefit analysis, it's 5 times better conserving the environment, sustaining it, than in logging the land.
Thanks for sharing that stat, Mr. Kon. I think very much so, right? In terms of the short-term gain over the long-term loss, people really have not calculated that enough. And so we need to be looking at what is the cost long-term and how can we actually build a more sort of sustainable economy to make sure that ecosystem services, for example, are accounted for, especially when it comes to things like peatlands, right, where the carbon storage is so high that it is almost insurmountable when you actually, degrade peatlands or log in peatland areas.
Right. Yes. And it's amazing. I think you were sharing with me how many thousands of people lost their lives in that 1 year of that haze that was.
That's right.
In 2015.
Yeah. Earlier in our video, we shared about 100,000 is the estimate on the number of deaths. So
how can economics ever justify the loss of lives and profit?
That's right. Okay, so moving on, there's another question in our chat box now, and this goes to Ms. Chan. So apart from hunting and habitat loss, you find that the current biodiversity governance and policy in Vietnam is not doing enough for endangered species such as the Duke langur.
Thank you for your questions. Actually, we have a really good, policy and governance thing in Vietnam for both biodiversity and species protection. The things is right now, I think there are some evaluation, some study to figure out what is the main issues in the whole Vietnam for saving biodiversity. But what I have observed in the areas that I have worked in during the last 15 years is that the capacity of the enforcement had not enough, including their knowledge, their skills, or their supporting tools for their work, not enough. So during the last 5 years, I have seen a lot of change in the departments of agriculture and rural development that is in charge of the forest protection in our country. We see a lot of change in that, with a lot of investment in that from projects, from the international projects to help increasing strengthen their knowledge and their capacity for their work. So we hope that in the next about 5 years it could be improved, it could be better. But yeah, like you said, during the last 10 years, it's really bad.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's nice to hear that things are improving and you are seeing, more investment going into that area. I think it's so key and so important because I think similarly in Malaysia, I've heard very similar problems coming out of the conservation space about how we have really strong policy, but it's the enforcement that falls, not that it falls short, but that it just isn't enough investment into it or capacity. So I definitely agree on that. And for our participants from other countries, not Malaysia or Vietnam, do you guys have any other experience with the policies in your country? Is it strong enough for conservation? More needs to be done. Do let us know.
Yeah, just one more small comment is, for example, in a really tiny story, how to engage the local people in conservation, right? So if we hand over this one for rangers or for forest protection in effort, it's gonna be it's kind of like out of their ability or their capacity. They will still need support with like how to develop a strategic plan for communication or for raising awareness of the local people. So right now they also just doing like keep inform them what is the law, and they have to follow the law, and they have no idea about like so how to change the behavior, how to support them to protect the forest instead of like push them away or something like that. So it's still a really big gap between the capacity of the enforcement and the reality. So that's why the CSO, I mean like civil society organizations in Vietnam, they take a big part in involving to fill in the gaps.
That makes sense, because it's not enough to just have a policy that says, okay, it's against the law. Okay, and then what am I going to do for my livelihood, right? Like, how do I actually make change? Yeah, that's a very, very important point. Thank you for bringing that up. So we have, I think, one last question for Mr. Kon, and this is from Yin Myo Sui. And Yin Myo asks, the weather now is much worse than years back. So does it impact the farming of the Orang Asli communities? And if so, how are you solving it?
Yeah, it's it's true. I noticed microclimates have changed as well, and you know that sometimes the rain is more persistent and longer and heavier, and sometimes the drought season gets longer and more difficult. So they are and less predictable. These planting seasons or climate seasons. I think at this point we're still managing because it hasn't gone to extreme conditions, and whilst drought may be more persistent and longer, and sometimes the water sources dry up, and so some crops do get affected. They don't survive as a result of a very prolonged drought. But thankfully, it hasn't been so long that they cannot then recover in the next cycle, and so it's battling, doing the best that they can. One of the things that's happening is that now that they are seeing these patterns, they understand how important it is now to protect the watershed areas, and now working together. Not just do they need to work together to farm, they now need to work together to start protecting their watershed areas, and so that they can mitigate the climate changes and make it more manageable. But unfortunately, these are things that sometimes it's a bigger issue that they can themselves find solutions to, and so adaptation may be necessary down the line. But for now, it's a workable livelihood strategy.
Thank you, Mr. Kon. That's good to hear, but keeping our eyes and ears open for the future as things continue to get a little bit dicey in terms of weather, especially in Malaysia. I think we're due to experience quite a bit more flooding in the next year, so good to keep an eye out on that. Okay, so one more question now for Ms. Chang before we end it, I think. So Ms. Chang, I wanted to ask you, right? So you talked about this really incredible case study. I wanted to know what's next for you in terms of conservation. Are you working on a different species, or are you continuing in this landscape? What's next for you, and what would you want the public to know?
So with the case study from Sunja Peninsula, it's lucky like right now the story have been spread and applied and inspire other people in other areas, other organizations that saving their species or saving their habitats. For example, like some organization, they also want me to train their staff or rangers how to identify the best way to develop a strategy to engage community in conservation. For example, in Phong Nha Kẻ Bàng National Park, they have a really proudly national park. But right now it seems like the community and the rangers are in the two sides. So that's something that we can help each other to find the best way to save our habitat. For my personal work, I figure out like it's hard to keep changing the behavior of the adults. So I create, not really create, but I have an organization that focusing on nature education. So I focusing on school children that from 3rd grade to 5th grade. That could be the best age to seed the love for nature in them. And we keep working with the small group, but along the central areas of Vietnam, that is central Annamite areas. Then we hope that in the next about like 10 years or 20 years, we will have the leaders that can have confident mind to make the decisions in saving the land or giving the land. So that is what I and mine about like 45 volunteers are working on. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I love to hear about especially engaging the youth and like planting the seeds of change, especially when it comes to conservation from a very young age. I think that's so key and so important. And actually that's something that our last symposium right before this one, Symposium 4, focused on. It focused on youth engagement, and we even had a speaker from Thailand who was working on youth engagement for peatlands in really young children. So it sounds like she had a very similar program to you, where she was engaging with about kids maybe in the ages of about 4 to 12 and taking them out into peat forest, showing them all the biodiversity like in a very hands-on way. And that's again how you instill that love for nature, and then future conservationists from there. So it's a very smart strategy. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, for my team, if anyone else wants to check out our last symposium about youth engagement, perhaps our team can share in the chat box so you can watch that at a later time. But thank you so much, Ms. Chang, for sharing. And just to end things here, Mr. Kon, any sort of last words you want to share about your program, or any sort of next steps for you in terms of YKPM and the OA organic program?
I think that the premise of the sharing is that there's a need to protect the environment for climate change and protecting the planet. But you cannot expect the indigenous people to protect the forests when their livelihoods are not secure. And therefore, the two actually go hand in hand. And so in some instances where, and Chang has mentioned this, forest is being protected, but at the exclusion of any local community, and particularly the indigenous people. They themselves are not allowed, suddenly their forest is gazetted as a forest reserve. And areas in which they use to depend for their ecosystem services now they are prohibited from going to get and utilized because it's been gazetted as a forest reserve and therefore is protected. But studies are showing that even in these areas, forests get degraded, and to expect the orang aslis to be relocated or not allowed to find a living from what they have been doing for years and years and decades and generations, it's really unfair to the local community. But secondly, not only is it unfair and deprives them of their livelihood and impoverishes it and makes them poor, they are not the culprits. And so when we understand their culture and their worldview, we should engage them as partners to protect the forest. And the best way to do that is to support them in developing green livelihoods so that they can continue to protect and sustain the forest better than just a gazettement of it as a protected forest. So sustaining their economy is critical to sustaining the environment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kon, and thank you for bringing that example up. I think for those who are not super aware right now in Malaysia, that's one of the major issues that has been happening. Just recently, there's been kind of like a lot of controversy around indigenous people not being allowed to harvest from their own land, which is quite a major issue. Again, it goes back to land rights, livelihoods, and making the poor poorer. So look that up. It's quite a big issue right now in Malaysia. And thank you, Mr. Kon, so much for highlighting that. And thank you to both of our speakers. That's all the time we have for our Q&A session. So thank you to Ms. Chang and Mr. Kon. You both have been amazing in your sharing and so inspiring. And I think hopefully our participants have learned a lot from today's session. I certainly have, about how to engage with different stakeholders and the importance of, involving local communities, particularly indigenous communities, in conservation. So next up, I have a treat for you because it is our last symposium of the year and of our program, sadly. We wanted to share and make this a special one because we wanted to share some of the winners from our ASEAN Peatland photo contest. So this is just, some of the key sort of favorites from that our team has picked out, but I also wanted to share with you guys the actual winners of our photo contest. So what we did is that we did a call out to all of our followers, people via email, all of the stakeholders that we've been engaging in person as well, to get them to share their perspectives on peatlands. And so we offered some cash prizes for all these different categories. So we had pristine peatlands, peatland degradation, and people on peat. So these are some of the stunning entries and winners from the photo contest. So just some shout outs here. So this one is by Hidayat Turrahman, and this is a photograph based in Central Kalimantan of peatland. So this is one of the winners in the DSLR category. Quite beautiful. You can check all of these out on our social media as well. Next. This one was the category people on peat. So we have 2 men on peatlands, and this is from an entrance from Talenoy wetland, and that's based in Thailand. And the winner for this one is Chaiwan, also in the DSLR category. Quite a beautiful image. And then this one, a bit of a sad one. It's about peatland degradation, and this is also a really stunning image to show everyone, right, of the land fires happening in South Sumatra in the deep peat area. So that's currently happening, and that's what causes haze in our region. So again, bringing awareness to what is happening in our region and how it affects all of us globally as well as regionally. And this is our open theme, where we wanted to make sure that we're not just engaging people who have DSLRs, but making sure that people who have mobile phones also can join our photo contest. And so this is an entry and a winner from the Philippines, and this is based in Agusan Marsh, showing what it's like for people living on the Agusan Marsh Wildlife Sanctuary. So just a snapshot of life on peatlands. And then this is the last entry, which is for our storytelling. So a visual storytelling, where our entries submitted a photo as well as a story. So you can read the story here as well as on our social media. But this is an image of Sintang in West Borne Province, Indonesia, and the winner is Wayuni Shalatan Fitri. So thank you to all of our entrants, people who entered our contest. We really appreciate it. You've shared some really amazing photos, and we'll be kind of sharing them on social media, as well as our publications, our website, our newsletters. So keep tuned for that. And yeah. And oh yeah, and this is one of, we got our social media folks to vote on their fan favorite. And this is an entry coming out of Kalimantan, Indonesia, where a farmer is harvesting rice prematurely because their rice fields end up being flooded. Again, it kind of speaks to climate change and the challenges of livelihoods on peatlands. Quite a stunning photo. So yeah, before we end, of course, I wanted to share with you our post-event survey. And in order to get your e-certificate of participation, you can just fill in the survey and let us know what you think of all of our symposiums, including this one. And we always welcome feedback. And now, before we end, I just wanted to share this last video. Again, it's kind of like a big thank you to everyone, every single one of our speakers, every single one of our participants, and of course, the team behind the scenes who's made it all happen. I wanted to share with you this video that our team has put together to thank you all, and to also highlight the amazing things that are happening on peatlands throughout Southeast Asia and how we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. And yeah, enjoy. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed that short thank you video. I just wanted to say again, thank you to every single one of you who's been here this whole time, supporting this program. And of course, none of this would be possible without our funders, the European Union, who have been instrumental in making all of this change happen. So thank you to everyone for joining today and celebrating our last symposium with us. Thank you to Mr. Kon and Ms. Chang for joining us as well. We really appreciate your sharing, and we hope, wishing you all the best with all of your endeavors. And for our community as well, please keep in touch with us via our social media. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us as well. But thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and have a great day ahead. Signing off.